The views and opinions expressed during Love and Life with Lana and Dave are those only of the speakers and guests and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or the position of our podcast hosts or affiliates. Any content provided is not intended to malign any religion, ethnic group, club, organization, company, individual, anyone, or anything. All right, let's do it.
You're listening to Love and Life with Lana and Dave, the podcast where logic is power and you take control. Thank you for tuning in and making the choice to listen in and get ideas for your own love and life. Now, here are your hosts, Lana Williams and David Vaccaro.
All right, this is Lana. Today we are going to learn, or I should say today we are going to discuss attachment theory. There's all these different types of phrases that come with attachment. And attachment is your ability to, or your way of relating to other people, your way of bonding with other people, right? It's basically the core of relationships for you, for anyone outside of yourself, right? So an attachment theory is the idea that how you were raised, and I believe it's the very first 2 or 3 years of your life that it's the most prominent, how you relate to your caregivers, how they responded to you, and what you took from your bond with your primary caregivers. So there's no broad stroke on this. So it means that you could have, a completely full family, father, mother, couple of siblings, and then how you relate to your caregivers as you develop, especially in early childhood, right? So if you know anybody that studies childhood development, they'll tell you there's 3 different types of, there's probably more than that, but I'm going to just mention 3 primary kind of types of development. Obviously, there's physical development, right? Activities, things like that. There's mental development. And then there's an emotional development that comes from how you relate to the world around you, what kind of environment you're coming up in, and then how your caregivers relate to you as you develop. So I'm going to bring up John Bowlby. He's one of the first people that studied child development as a psychiatrist or a psychologist with emotional relation and how children develop their emotions and the way they relate to other people. 2 words, and I'm not going to go too crazy with these definitions, but mirroring and attunement, right? So attunement is how attuned your caregivers are to you as a child. When you do something, how do they react to it? Do they have some kind of an attunement to how you feel? And of course, when you first come home, and I'm no expert, but of course everybody was a child at one time, including myself. When your child comes home from the hospital, you're going through that step-by-step process of how to understand what is it your child needs, what their specific personality is, and that kind of thing, right? So of course at first they cry and you're like, well, what do I do? You throw a bunch of stuff at them and they stop crying. You go, okay, that's what that is. But as time goes on, your child being happy or sad or any other things that come on because of very primary emotions as a child, you don't obviously have really, you are who you are. You're wet, you need to be changed. You're hungry, you need to be fed. You're tired, you need to sleep. And these are the basic things that happen, right? But as time goes on, your caregivers will become more and more attuned to you as a person and how you express what you need and then respond to you in whatever specific way they respond. And of course, the best way to do that is an attunement is understanding how you feel and almost feeling the way you do, or an acknowledgement and understanding of how you feel from you to your caregiver, right? And there's also that your face facing your caregiver and this kind of bonding that goes on from you to your either your mother or whatever your primary caregiver would be around you all the time. There's that close proximity and the facial expressions and mirroring of things that you do and they do back to you, or them responding to you with some sort of positive or understanding word or phrase or sound, right? You laugh, they laugh. You cry, they show visible understanding that you're upset, you're angry, you're this, you're that. These are the little teeny tiny things that happen at the beginning of your relationship with your caregivers. And this stuff in the first couple years, this cements kind of the way that you relate to all people in your life from that point on. It's not static, right? It can be changed. It's dynamic. But a lot of that really primary understanding of everyone around you kind of gets built in that first couple years. That's where the really heavy impression starts. And the earlier you experience it, and respond to it, the longer it goes and the harder it is to change. So it's not totally impossible, but of course, where your impression comes from will maybe dictate how much work you're going to need to do to change it. So John Bowlby, his whole name, I'll just give you that, Edward John Moslin Bowlby, and it's Bowlby. Now, if you're going to look some stuff up like this, like myself, I want to make sure I give you the information you need to search it. And so he started with some early development. And like I said, he's kind of the one that sort of, I guess, created attachment theory as a pioneer, basically is what they're calling it. So basically, he's kind of the one that began attachment theory or created the understanding of attachment theory. And this goes beyond just you and your caregiver. It goes on to environment. Like, if you're in a war-torn country, but you're with your mother, it's actually going to be better for you to be with your mother in a war-torn country than it would be to be taken from your parents and live in a palace, but don't have anybody to take care of you. When you have a caregiver that's there with you, and very, very early on, how you get treated within that environment is also important. And then as a child, you're either going to like how it was and try to emulate it, or not like how it was and try to change it. But there are also people who dislike how they were raised or don't understand that how they were raised was unhealthy and will perpetuate it. And that's all going to be a matter of how you understand your upbringing, right? How you relate to it, what you make of it, what you think of it, that kind of thing. And I don't know that there's any specific way to say this will turn out like this or this will turn out like that, because your personality is also involved as well. There are also people who will grow up in really good circumstances that maybe don't want to perpetuate, so you can never really dictate how people are going to turn out based on what they had. So from there, you end up with an attachment style. So they call it. And attachment theory is, the study and understanding of how attachment works. Attachment style is your particular attachment style when you relate to other people based on how you were raised, right? Everybody has an attachment style. So for the people out there that say, well, I don't have any attachment problems, I mean, that's not really what this is about. You kind of have to read the definition of it. We all have some sort of an attachment style based on how we were raised. And it's not as simple as, do I attach to people or do I not? There's a little more to it than that. I'm going to bring up Mary Ainsworth. She's the next person who kind of took Bowlby's work and perpetuated it. And I'm going to give you her name just so that you can look her up, because she's kind of done further studies on attachment theory based on what Bowlby documented. Her name is Mary Ainsworth. That's Ainsworth. And she kind of narrowed it down. And I'm not saying that she's the only one that did it, but she's the kind of one that kind of narrowed it down to some categories. Your two primary categories of attachment theory are insecure and secure. That's kind of where it starts. That's your umbrella. Insecure attachment is you're kind of at a relaxed, calm. People around you don't define you, but you do have healthy connections to those people. So the things that those people around you do, that it may affect you, but you are also very content with yourself, right? So this is like you're interrelational, I guess, right? Or interdependent, meaning you're independent and you can do what you got to do by yourself, but you're also very good in a room full of people and you can relate to everybody in that way. And you're very close with and have a healthy bond with people around you that are in your life, whether they're very close or not. And all of your relationships remain at the level they're at and you're good and fine with everything, and it's all hunky-dory, right? Insecure is that people around you make you react in some way. This is just like my definition of it, or the way that I would explain it, is that in some way you bounce off the people around you in a not necessarily healthy way. There are 4 categories. One is the secure, and then there are the 3 insecure. 3 insecure are listed as a dismissive avoidant, a fearful avoidant, and what they call anxious preoccupied, or an anxious attachment. And if you go back to your childhood and say, okay, well, how does it look based on how I was raised? If you're a child that was in some way not able to get enough affection, or you did get enough affection but have a hard time with getting less affection as you get older, it's almost like a status quo or baseline of you getting a whole lot of attention and affection constantly, to the point where you freak out and it upsets you when this attention drops or it wanes or it changes to be any lower, right? That's going to throw you for a loop. Or you have not grown up with any attention, or you were dealing with neglect, or things like that. A lot of this stuff comes from trauma, childhood trauma, abuse, neglect, sexual assault, things like that go on in a childhood. All that stuff manifests itself in some kind of attachment style. So that would be anxious. Anxious would be like somebody, it comes off as clingy. It comes off as an anxious, preoccupied is another way to look at it. So they do call it that as well. And that's something where that's an obsessive characteristic or trait where you're just sort of sitting around and obsessing over this particular relationship, what it is, where it's going, whether it's a relationship that's romantic or it's a friendship, or it could be a work relationship. It isn't really, I think it gets the most intense in relationships that are romantic, but it's not limited to that. So it can be a coworker, it can be a friend, it can be a family member as well. You do the same thing. It's across the board with most people. And you tend to be the type that's like, you want to make sure people are happy with you. You don't want people to be angry with you. You want to make sure that you're doing things the right way. And you usually look for very specific signs for people that you're doing what they want you to do, or that they are not going anywhere. It is a very reassuring, acknowledging type need. It's something where you need to be reassured, you need to be acknowledged. There are things that you need to see in order to think that everything's okay. And when you don't see those things, it will throw you. A fearful avoidant, they also call a disorganized avoidant. That's kind of depends on who you're talking to, but those people desire close relationships. They don't like vulnerability. So they want to be close, but then when they become vulnerable, it freaks them out, and that makes them unpredictable. So they're kind of, it's really more of the push-pull thing that you're dealing with. They really want the closeness and they'll seek it. But the minute that they have to be vulnerable back, or it makes them vulnerable in some way, it can trigger them. And avoidant is, of course, the word avoidant, meaning that they're going to, what we have a dissociation is what it's called. That's the name of it, or detachment. And these people are the people that kind of drop off. They'll kind of go missing for 3 days for something that they got really too close, and they felt some vulnerability and didn't like it. And then instead of telling you, I'm a dismissive avoidant, which is the next thing I'm going to explain. It's not in any way, shape, or form like on purpose, but it's not something they get. It's an overwhelming feeling that they've just got to go off and regulate. It's called regulation, right? A lot of times you're not told that the AWOL is going to happen. It just sort of does. And so dismissive attachment or dismissive avoidant attachment is basically, it comes from not getting your needs met as a kid, and it's emotionally or mentally, and I'm going to start that this is basically how my childhood developed. I didn't like the disappointment. Some people don't like the disappointment, and my way of dealing with disappointment was to remove the need and just become so self-efficient that I didn't have to worry about anybody else, because I felt that people life that I felt close to or that I wanted to bond with, I felt a lot of people let me down, weren't there for me, or didn't do the right thing when it came to either protecting me or making sure that I was supported or safe or whatever. So I just became ultra, hyper self-sufficient. That's technically what a dismissive avoidant does. Dismissive avoidants tend to be less aware that they want close relationships, or they have cadence and a level of relationship that's just lower than most people around them. So, some people, we're very programmed to do that. We're very programmed to be autonomous. So the idea of becoming completely codependent in a relationship when it starts is going to be something that we're going to veto that, because we're fine by ourselves. We want somebody else who's fine by their self, and we like the overlap, but we don't necessarily want the dependency. Of course, over time that does change, but we put up a little bit of a fight in the beginning with the dependency. And there are times that we don't want to let our guard down, because again, as a kid in your most impressionable places, in your year-old or 6-month-old or 2-year-old, when somebody let you down as a kid, that was major, and if you let somebody disappoint you more than once, as you get to be an adult, you just stop allowing people to give you the chance to be disappointed. It's just the way it is. So for me, I have a lot of close friendships and relationships, but they're very long term. So a lot of the friends that I have been years, 6 years, 7 years, 10 years, 20 years, 40 years. This is the kind of relationships I have. In my life, I've known people forever and ever and ever. These are the people that I trust and I don't worry about. But with new people, I'm very, hey, let's see how you go. Let's kind of go along with what we're doing. And I'll decide based on how I see you act in a long-term consistent thing. Consistency is big to me. And I know a lot of people, even people who don't mean to, cannot keep things consistent. And I guess that's life, right? People have things going on and whatever. But to me, consistency is a very trustworthy trait. If I see you do the same thing for years and you say you're going to be somewhere, you're there. You say you're going to be somewhere and you can't do it, you let me know. I like to be informed. I like people to inform. If people are jumping all over the place and not telling me what they're doing, that to me is inconsistent. It's flaky, and I want no part of that. I'll keep in touch with people who are that way, but I just won't depend on them to do anything. So they'll just be sort of like acquaintances or people that I'm familiar with, but I won't put any kind of trust in them to do anything that's major. And that's really my way of dealing with it, which I don't think it's really unhealthy. This is kind of how we have to deal with people in life, right? There are people that are there for you, and there are people that are there, but not in the same way you want them to be. And that's fine. Everybody's at a different place. That doesn't make them wrong. It just makes you and them not maybe a match for a decent relationship, friendship, whatever. So those are your styles, right? So technically, secure is kind of the holy grail. No matter what it is that your insecure attachment style is, secure is really what you're shooting for. And a series of getting to know yourself, and starting in December of last year with emotional regulation. And it's also kind of part of attachment theory as well, to understand how to self-regulate. No matter who you are, first of all, you have to be really honest with yourself about who you are. There are people who will never do that. If you don't know attachment theory at all, you're already at a loss and you're already behind the eight ball, and you don't have to call it attachment theory, but you've got to call it something, and you've got to dig in. I know a lot of people don't like to dig into themselves. They don't really want to know, or they're afraid to find out, or whatever the case may be. There comes a time in life where you're going to have to figure out who you are and what makes you you. You almost can't do anything else in your life until you understand what your deal is. And there are a lot of people out there who don't know who they are. And that's kind of scary. You know what I mean? Especially as you get older, because you're dealing with other people and you have to know what you want from other people, and you have to know what you want from life. And if you don't know who you are, a lot of that stuff that you're doing is like, there's no purpose, or there's no understanding, or there's no direction for you almost, if you don't really know who you are and know yourself well. I mean, this is really between you and yourself. You can tell other people all day long you know who you are, but at the end of the day, when you go home and you're standing in the mirror before you turn the lights out, only you know whether you know yourself that well. And if you're the type of person that doesn't like to look within and find out who you really are, I mean, it can be scary, but it can also be very, very healthy. It can change your life. You know, it can make your relationships better. It can make your path, your choices in life, your path, your determination, whatever it is, your purpose. A lot of that stuff is way clearer if you understand who you are. And to understand who you are, you have to kind of understand how you became you. And so you have to kind of navigate your childhood. And sometimes it's not pretty, but it is what it is, right? You can't change it. We have no time machines. That'd be nice, but we don't. So we have to figure out how to cope out with who we are and how we were raised, right? And believe me, I've spent a lot of time. I say this because it's true. I'm one of those people that analyze myself from a very, very young age. I've always been inquisitive and curious and wanting to know what makes things work. And human beings are no exception. And I started with myself as a human being because I was the only available patient it wasn't invasive to analyze myself at any given time to find out why, right? Why is a big thing for me. I feel this way, but why? Or I want this, but why? Or I'm doing this, but why? That's pretty much my life, right? So self-discovery is not a bad thing. Now I'm going to mention pseudoscience here for a minute, say that there are people who are like, oh, this is psychobabble and blah, blah, blah. Well, first of all, attachment theory, it makes sense that you would base your relationships on your home life and on your very, 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 very young self as you develop, right? I do this, they do that. And whatever they do is going to be impressionable to you. It makes sense. So it doesn't really matter what you label it. This particular thing works for you because when you take tests for something like this, it basically gives you a category based on what it is that you answer questions to, and it puts you here. Every single one of these attachment styles are within a spectrum, obviously. And I'm going to get even more complicated about this and say that your attachment style is also going to change based on who you're dealing with. So if you are a secure person and you deal with somebody who's extremely avoidant, it's possible you may lean a little bit anxious because, we're always affected by the people around us and what, even as secure as we can be, right? Obviously, as human beings, we all connect. And so, if somebody's too extreme to one degree, it's possible that it may push you in the other direction to there's all this yin and yang and balance that needs to happen. Obviously, the worst and the most common pair-ups are usually anxious / avoidant. Those are the worst ones, but those are the ones that are almost always happening or happening way more than they should. But this will take you back to some relationships that you know some people that have told you these stories. Oh, well, it was like everything was great. And then all of a sudden this person packed up and left. I didn't even know they were gone. And they were gone for like 3 months or 3 weeks or 3 days or whatever it was. And then they came back and it was like they just came back like nothing ever happened. And like I'm all over the place. I'm on a roller coaster. One day everything's great. The next day I can't do anything right. I mean, these are two, whatever they are, these are two separate types of attachment styles that are getting involved in one relationship. I think the first time that I can remember ever seeing anything about attachment theory would have been Good Will Hunting. Now, if anybody's ever seen Good Will Hunting, the premise of it is basically you've got Matt Damon and plays this young kid who's kind of a genius. He's almost like he's a math whiz, right? And he's working, as a janitor, bricklayer, he's doing some stuff like that, but he's working kind of at MIT. So when nobody's looking, he's filling out equations. So at the end of the day, he's a savant when it comes to math, and that's how it all starts. But there's also this kind of side plot line that's going on where he's getting involved with somebody who goes to Harvard, and he's trying to build up a relationship. And there's a point in time where he just kind of drops, and he goes through therapy. And Robin Williams plays this therapist. And there's one point in time where the two of them have a lot in common and they kind of get along. And the therapy was was a promise that he had to make in order to not be put in jail for a certain amount of time for some kind of scuffle he got into. But anyway, at the end of the movie, not that it's not really a spoiler or anything, but like you learn that he has an attachment disorder, and the attachment disorder is it's almost like get them before they get you. Now, I think if I look at him and say, okay, well, what is that? I mean, I would assume that's probably some sort of a fearful avoidance, because he dealt with foster homes and abuse. And that does come from, who knows what his family life was like, right? As a kid. And of course, this is a storyline and it's a script, so it's not real people. But, let's say that, in the first 3 years of his life, he had a really crappy childhood because of the environment he was in. And then somehow or other, he ended up with no family and ended up getting placed in foster homes. And he had foster parents that were abusive and all kinds of stuff like that. And, he lived on the street younger than he should have, and all that kind of stuff. That's the kind of stuff that will cause what you call trauma wounds, and you will respond to people in a certain way. And they over exaggerated at the end where he had a standoff with his therapist about it, where you could tell that for the most part, he was trying to get a read on his therapist, whether his therapist just could be one more person that kind of let him down. And the same thing for this girl he was dating. And at some point he realized that these people were solid for him. And then it does come down to you at some point where you have to say, okay, well, what am I going to do? I can look at everybody else as the problem, and it's easy for me to do that because then I don't have to think about it, and I can just blame everyone else and go on my way, and I can justify my behavior. But there comes a point in time where people are solid and they're there for you. And then you have to become you have to reflect on yourself, and you have to look within to find out like what you're doing. Are you sabotaging somebody that's there for you, or somebody that is solid and can support you? That all goes on, right? With avoidance. Well, anxious and avoidance especially, right? But the anxious avoidant relationship, and I've been in many, and the reason I've been in many is because a lot of anxious people have, come up in a neglectful environment, right? So sometimes to them, an avoidant personality is sort of like a familiar thing. There's some kind of bottomless pit thing for them that they relate to, and it comes from being with their family, right? So, and avoidance are kind of the opposite, where they've got themselves to a point where they don't need to be hanging all over someone else. And so it goes back and forth. And so for the most part, both trigger each other, and most avoidant anxious relationships are tumultuous and all that kind of stuff. A lot of the time it's because the people involved don't know that this is their style. They just don't know. They know they're upset about something. They know they're overwhelmed by something. They can't stop it because they don't know what it is they're doing. Recently, I got involved. I have an dismissive avoidant and fearful avoidant group that I belong to, just so that, you get in a group with a bunch of people that kind of have the same deal that you have, just so that you can understand and relate. It's always good to go and find a group of people like yourself, because it makes you feel a little better. You can kind of bounce ideas off other people. It's just good for you. It's good grounding. But I also recently joined an dismissive avoidance support group, which I thought was for dismissive avoidance, but found out it's for people that have dated dismissive avoidance. And boy, is there a whole lot of craziness going on in there, right? But I've stayed in there just to kind of like, okay, I date a lot of anxious people, and it's very possible as an avoidant or as an anxious person to be earned secure, which means I've learned what my style is. I understand what the other person is going through, and I can adjust to this. So you can actually work through these problems and make a relationship work. Most at the beginning of learning about your attachment style, usually you look at the opposite of style and say, well, this person is absolutely a no-go. If you find out somebody's like the other way, you just run from them. Then eventually you understand, it's not necessary to do that. It's possible to work through it. Both people have to be aware of it. Both people have to understand what's happening. They have to have honest, direct, on the table information that they can work from. Because what anxious and avoidant people do is trigger each other. They just trigger each other. And the other one will go into, one goes into an extreme mode where they start calling and texting and chasing you and following you around and not letting you have 5 minutes. And the other side will be triggered and go into almost like a lockdown stonewalling thing where they don't want to communicate at all, until the storm passes. And this is kind of what happens with anxious and avoidant. And if you both know that you're that way, to me, it not doesn't eliminate the problem, but you're aware, oh, I'm triggered by what you did. Okay. As soon as you know what something is, you're like, oh, okay. You could see it play out and it makes total sense to you. And if both people are on the same page as far as trying to get into a secure place, then it's definitely possible that it can happen. It's not really easy work, but it's way better than not knowing your style and just bouncing off the other person constantly and going through like a bunch of toxic arguments and breakups and all that kind of stuff. And there are a lot of people out there, like I said, that don't know what their style is, don't know why they're reacting the way they are. If they're anxious and I need to know what's going on. I haven't heard from him in 2 hours. Is he doing this? Is he doing that? They need to see some kind of specific sign that everything in the relationship is okay and it's obsessive for them. That's an insecure, anxious, preoccupied state, right? But if they don't know they're doing that, then they're just gonna be like, well, I don't know why I'm doing it. I can't stop doing it. I don't know what to do. A lot of times they'll become indignant because they think this makes I want what I want and I can't stop what I'm doing. So I'm going to make you feel bad because you need to give me what I need. And demanding that somebody love you and demanding that somebody respond to you and demanding that somebody give you a specific thing that you want, but you don't want to tell them, because a lot of insecure, anxious, preoccupied people are looking for signs that make sense, but they don't want to give you the information. They just want you to do it. And if you do it wrong, you're in a minefield. But for people that are avoidant, it's the same kind of thing where you don't know why you get overwhelmed and shut down. You may be totally in love with somebody or be totally, good friends with somebody or know somebody well and love that person and want to make sure that they're happy, but you don't know why you keep shutting down and shutting them out. And why, when they do certain things, it overwhelms you. If you don't know your style, then you're not going to understand what's happening, and you're probably going to become indignant, or you're going to think something's wrong with you and you don't deserve to be around people, which happens, or you're going to become indignant and scream at the other person and tell them it's their fault. They're making you that way. Neither one of those things is really productive unless you know, right? So anyway, that's the overview. I just wanted to bring up attachment styles in general, attachment theory. I want to recommend a couple of books. So there's a book called Attached, and it's by Amir Levine. That's Amir, then last name Levine, right? So it's a book that describes, and don't get me wrong, this is not a groundbreaking, it's not the best book in the world. There are some things that I don't particularly like about this book, but it will give you a good sense of understanding what attachment is. We'll give you some examples and break down some categories for you. It's got some questions and answers in it. If you have any interest in wanting to know what your type is, it can give you, there's a couple pages in there where there's a quiz that would kind of give you an idea where you land on the spectrum. I did want to bring up secure being the one thing that everybody wants to be, but also secure is the one person or one type that you want to find, because secure is kind of a cure-all for both sides in a certain way. And that means that secure isn't a triggered type. So if you're an anxious type and you need reassurance all the time, or you need to make sure somebody tells you the right thing or gives you the right words of affirmation or the right words of encouragement or support or whatever it is that you need to hear, a secure person will just go, oh, okay, well, sure, I can do that. And that's fine. Or if you're the type that's an avoidant and you meet a secure and you're dating a secure and you say, I need some space, the secure person is going to go, okay. And that's it. Whereas an anxious person will bother you and force you to come back and chase you and come after you and try to get you to turn around. And in the process, they torment themselves. They're creating a lot of cortisol for themselves doing that. And it's actually spins them out of control, right? Because I don't want to say that they want to control how things turn out, but that's really the way it comes off. That's really what it looks like. And then they think you are trying to control things because you just don't want to engage. And so I can only say how it is from the avoidant point of view, in the sense that I am a self-contained unit. I like people who can self-regulate. And if you can't self-regulate, I can't deal with it. And if somebody can't get themselves under control, I don't want it to be, if I'm dating you and all that, that's great. I want you to be happy, but I do not want to be responsible for you not being able to calm yourself down or not being able to come off of a tantrum you're in. Or, there's an intense need for someone to respond for these people it's over the top for me. Now, I'm not earn secure, but I'm doing better. Half the battle is knowing your style. It's just knowing this attachment theory exists, right? First, and then knowing your style. These are I think if you're going to come back 100% to secure, you're going to get a good 60% of the way just knowing attachment theory exists and just knowing that your attachment style is blah, 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 and then knowing what triggers you. And as I learned about this, before I knew what attachment theory was, I'm a communicator in the sense that I may not communicate while something's happening, but I will warn you, hey, I know we're going to start, we've been dating. I just want to let you know this is what happens. This might happen. You don't really run into a lot of secure people. I have, and it's really nice when you do, but it's just a lot of secure people are off the market because there's not many of them stay single just because they can kind of gel with any type. So a lot of them are just not out there. Usually the type that's out there that you're going to run into, as a matter of fact, as an avoidant anyway, I'm only going to run into anxious people because avoidant people, I'm not saying that we don't gel, but myself and an avoidant person, especially another dismissive avoidant, we're both pretty laid back. And a lot of times we're so laid back that it fades out and neither one of us picks up the pieces to continue. Maybe we trigger each other because of one person saying, oh, well, the other person doesn't seem to really care, so I'm not going to worry about it. And they'll write you off. And you'll maybe notice, but it will take a while. And that's kind of what happens. You run into them again and you kind of talk about it, but it doesn't, it's a kind of a lackluster thing. It just doesn't have any huge what have you to it because both of you are trying to protect yourself and neither one of you is really looking. Whereas an anxious person will reach out. An anxious person is going to bother you. They're going to try to figure out what's going on. And so they have a constant reaching out and connecting that they're trying to do. And sometimes it's over the top, but it's never going to not happen. It'll definitely be that they reach out. Eventually they get resentful that they're the only ones that are doing that. And of course, as dismissives, we kind of say, well, you don't have to do that. You're the one doing that. This is what happens, right? I don't want to have, why am I the only one that ever cares about this? And the other one, well, you don't have to be that way. You could calm down and not be that way. And then that's what happens. But if you know that and you know the other person's type, I'm not saying it's a walk in the park, but it's way easier to deal with the relationship knowing that that's their type and that's how they relate. So for some homework, you might want to check out what your type is. Again, the book Attached is pretty good in the sense that it gives you an idea, a blueprint of what attachment theory is, attachment style is, and it will give you your attachment style if you're so curious as to know what that is. And you can guess, but you'd be surprised at what it is, to be honest with you. You can guess. And it does change. It changes over time depending on what your life is like and who's around you. Your type could totally change. You can slide on the scale. So that's that. And then the other book I wanted to bring up was a book called The Body Keeps the Score. And I brought it up before, but there's a ton of stuff, good information in this book. So it's Bessel van der Kolk. It's Bessel, and then A, then van der Kolk, then VAN, which is lowercase, then DER, which is lowercase, then KOLK with the capital K. But if you look up the book, The Body Keeps the Score, you should be able to find it pretty quickly. There's a lot of information. There's a world of information in this book for a lot of things, including it has a lot to do with there's a lot of therapy involved information in there. Some of it is rough. Some of the stuff that you're listening to, because this is somebody that sits down and talks to people that have PTSD and things like that. So there's things that those people have seen and dealt with that are not fun to listen to. But life is life, right? And it's helpful if you've been through some really traumatic stuff or some really tough stuff and you need to kind of know where to go from there as far as whether it's what kind of therapy it is or just understanding the process of how your brain works and why you have the trauma that you have or you have reactions that you have after a trauma is over, how you cope with it and how your brain copes with it and that kind of stuff. I find that stuff fascinating, so I liked it. But it also has a lot about attunement and mirroring, which are two things that begin to shape your attachment style at a very young age. So if you get a chance to read that book, pull that book, listen to it, whatever you you can do. It's actually a really, really good book. And again, it's a lot of information and it's a long book, but it's got so much great stuff in it. So it's almost a reference guide, to be honest with you. So those are the books. But anyway, I invite you to find your attachment style. And once you figure out what yours is, and as you go through life and you start to understand the styles better, you may be able to pinpoint styles on people or not. Hopefully you run into people who are also open to finding out what their style is and to understanding what techniques they can use based on their style to navigate life better. Because all of our relationships are based on attachment style. Now, though, again, it's not necessarily labeled that way, but basically we all have a way that we relate to other people in our lives based on how we were raised, and we utilize them daily. And I don't think we're aware of it most of the time, but I think once we are aware of these type of things, it makes life a whole lot easier to live. So that's it. Attachment theory. That was our podcast for the week. I said I'll put some show notes, some information about those books and the attachment theories and all that kind of stuff in the show notes. And in the meantime, I think next week we're going to be doing dating. We're going to get into dating next week, but have a great week. February is here, or February, when you get this podcast, it will be February. So happy February. Download, subscribe, give us a 5-star review. Our main page is www.lanaanddave.com, or you can go to buymeacoffee.com/Lana and Dave. Actually, I think you should do both. Buy us a coffee and download, subscribe. Every single platform and every single social media platform that we have should be on that page. You should be able to listen to all our podcasts there as well if you need to. But have a good week. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye. Hey, you just listened to Love and Life with Lana and Dave. Thanks for joining us, and we hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please share the podcast, leave us a comment or review, and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss any new content. We'll see you soon.